Alrighty, traders. Good morning. This is Blake Morrow. You are listening to the Morning Edge webinar. Happy Wednesday to you, and happy let's get a deal done with Greece Day. We're really excited today to bring on our special guest. We have Steve Vulgi from Athens, Greece, who's going to be joining us. I'm going to see if I can find him as an attendee here. Give me 1 second. There he is. I'm going to unmic Steve here, and let's welcome Steve with a big round of applause. Hey, Steve.
Have a nice morning. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. How are you?
You know, edgy, obviously.
I could imagine edgy. That would be a really really good term to kind of explain how you're feeling right now, to illustrate how you're feeling.
It's an emotional roller coaster for people living here, especially for people that have the full capacity of realizing what's at stake. Because fortunately for them, or unfortunately, plenty of people can't really comprehend the seriousness of the situation.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about the seriousness of the situation, what do you mean by the some people just don't really understand the gravity of or the seriousness, if you will.
Let's just say that at the moment Greece is deadlocked between two choices, with none of them being good. If I very much like usually to use examples, because sometimes examples make situations easier to understand. So let's say in this specific example, let's say that Greece is a cancer patient. Okay, so you realize that you have cancer, which is obviously a very bad situation to go through. And the first thing that you immediately must realize is that there are no good options for you. Option one is like chemotherapy and whatever else, radiation or whatever else is required, which, as you know, is very painful. And the alternative is death. So actually, there are some situations in life, and this is one of them, that there is no good deal. I mean, you have to go through some pain, even at the best case scenario. In this specific situation, obviously, the pain is a lot. The patient has been subscribed with some very faulty medicine, and that has worsened the situation. And we are still trying to find a solution using more or less the same mixture of economics and policies and politics that have worsened the situation. So that's a good description of where we are at the moment.
And do you think the average Greek citizen is now starting to realize that not being in the Eurozone, well, actually, maybe this is a two-part question. Not being in the Eurozone is a good thing, or is a bad thing, excuse me. But what do you feel as a Greek, as a citizen of Greece? And I already know the answer, I think, but for everybody else, what do you think is better for Greece, being in the Eurozone or being independent and out of the Eurozone? What do you feel?
Let me state it like that. First of all, Greeks have always been pro European Union and Eurozone in a huge percentage, like a huge majority of Greeks, around 80 to 85%, have traditionally been pro European Union and Eurozone. Lately, that percentage has started decreasing because they're feeling the pain, and there are a lot of people that are trying to either being misinformed or trying to push their own interests, or a combination of the two, are trying to persuade them that the pain that's coming to them is due to being in the Eurozone, which is actually very much untrue. Obviously, the combination of the Troika institutions have done a lot of mistakes in judgment and in trying to rectify the Greek situation. But Greece found itself in a very dire situation, and Greeks have nobody else to blame but themselves, their political choices. Greeks have always been optimists and always been voting for whoever would promise more, because in their optimist nature they always tended naively to believe that somebody can produce way more than they can. So given the example of the latest government party, which is Syriza, uh, being ready to take the government of a broke state, actually, they had promised everything. I mean, like giving raises to pensions, to the minimum wage, reducing many of the taxes that the memorandums brought, etc., etc., etc.
Promises that couldn't be filled.
Not only promises they couldn't be held, I will tell you that by losing 5 months for them trying to broker a deal at better terms, and actually believing that they can broker a deal at way better terms, the economy has already been derailed and lost around 7 to 8 productive months. Why? Because from the point that they disagreed in voting for a president of democracy, no matter who was recommended by the previous government, it was a certainty, because that's the constitution, that we would have elections. So from the moment that elections were already, as a fact, happening, the previous government obviously had to stop making any reforms, because they also have to show a better face, to the voter. And after 2-3 months, we had elections. They took over, and they lost 5 months doing absolutely nothing but promising that they will, backtrack on all the painful changes that have happened, and ended up actually at the 11th hour suggesting to the institutions of the Troika a deal that includes 8 billion euros of new taxes, which haven't even been accepted yet, which are going to be like the last nail to the coffin of the Greek economy. And I'm not against making reforms, but the problem is, for me to give you an idea, is that the institutions have been asking since day one a lot of reforms from the problematic Greek state, which they have always been replaced by taxes. Why? Because the governments do not want to harm their political clients, which is the vast majority of the people that are actively voting are dependent on the state. Because I'll remind you some numbers I gave you the previous time. We have around 3 million people that are pensioners, another roughly 1 million people that are directly or indirectly state employees and are being paid by the state, so that makes them 4 million people. And you have 2.3 million working for the private sector. As you very well know, the private sector is always considered to be the steam engine of an economy. And in this country, the private sector now only employs around 20 to 25% of the Greek population.
Wow.
Yes. And every government that has been coming and taking over are trying to prevent their main base of voters from as much harm as they can, because obviously pensions have been reduced by a lot, that's a fact. Public sector salaries have been reduced by a lot, that's also a fact. The public sector has been decreased by a lot, but mostly because people were rushing to the exit by taking early pensions or full pensions if they were allowed, so they didn't lose some of the benefits, which means that this government is no different. Actually, it is even worse than the previous ones, because it's claiming to be a leftist government. They brought a suggestion of measures that is constituted by 97% by taxes and 3% by reduction of public spending. As you understand, the mixture should have been the exact opposite. Vast majority of the reforms should have been from reducing public spending and not doing any more harm to the private sector, to the real economy, because if you end up destroying what's left of it, there will be nothing left to salvage from the shipwreck called, Greek economy at the moment.
Right. Okay. So obviously, the private sector is the sector that the focus should be on. But let's turn our attention to what's happening over the next few days. We're obviously in a very strict timeline now. Joe, one of our listeners and gentleman I've worked with in the New York City area, he said that there was a tweet from the IMF saying that they'll be lenient on an IMF payment if it's a day or two, or it's going to be late. That's
I
good.
have no doubt about that. They will definitely find, listen to me, technically, legally, when the 30th of June expires, the leftover bailout money disappears, legally speaking. Okay, there is another 3.5 billion euros left from the European Union part as part of the second memorandum that was supposed to have finished since last year and hasn't, because it's been getting postponed because we can't get through the last, let's say, control of, measures in place, etc., for the last tranche of money to be released, which is roughly 7.5 billion. 3.5 billion of those are from the European Union, if I'm not mistaken. Legally, those money disappear into thin air after the 30th of June passes. But as you very well know, if, they want to find a solution to legally bypass those kind of problems, and for example, the IMF payment also is due on the 30th of June, but legally, if they want to bypass it by a few days, they will find a way, there is always a way. But that doesn't change much, because for that to happen, they have to know that an agreement is happening, and, just due to technicalities, there are a few more hours or a couple of days more needed to finalize it. The problem is that Tsipras suggested a deal that is extremely heavy to swallow for a government that was promising to cancel the previous deals, coming back and bringing 8 billion extra of austerity and not taking back anything of the previous austerity measures. As you understand, he's already too heavy. He came back for 1.5 days, and he's been under constant attack from people that were voting him, hoping that he would do something different, from his own party members saying that this is not what we promised the people, especially since his party is constituted by about 1/3 of his MPs are like almost communists, let's say, in the political spectrum. So as you understand, he's already in a very tough position, and now he's going back, and they're telling him, listen, the 8 billion measures you suggested are not enough, and we need to make some changes. And as you know, when we're talking about changes, we're not talking about making it softer, although, to be honest, for the first time, the IMF told him that, listen, many of the measures you suggest are going to bring more pain to the Greek economy and are actually going to bring, to decrease your GDP even further, which means that the measures that you're suggesting in a few months down in the future are not going to be enough again, and we'll need to do more. And actually, they're right about that. Trying to get everything, as I told you, from the private sector, which is already, in so much pain, is just going to derail the economy further.
So what? Okay, and that I hear everything that you're saying, but what I don't understand is what is a viable solution, because without, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, unless there's some concessions made from the creditors' side of the table, really it's going to be very difficult for Greece to live up to its end of the bargain. I mean, you know, it, to make any type of
I
reforms.
understand what you're saying, so let me save you the time and tell you the following.
Okay.
Tsipras at the moment has surrendered completely. He's only asking, after he was asking for everything, like, from recognizing that the debt is illegal and, excuse my language, BS like that, he has now surrendered completely because he knows that we are at the end of the cliff, and he's only more or less asking for one thing, and one thing only, which is very fair, which is the following: a commitment that the Troika has already given to the previous Prime Minister Samaras, but they did nothing for it back in 2012, a commitment that further down in the future, but a written commitment, they realize and recognize that part of the debt must be written off because, objectively speaking, is not cannot be serviced. At least not under the current terms, because as I've told you in our private conversations, you can make any debt pile being serviceable without writing off its nominal value, as long as you reduce its present value, its net present value. So, for example, if you push the debt 30 years in the future, like the average maturity 30 years into the future, and decrease the interest paid to, let's say, an average of, let's say, 0.25, you're actually haircutting the net present value by so much that even a 180% debt to GDP is easily serviceable, because at the end of the day, what matters is what is the percentage of GDP that you have to pay for your debt per year. So if that percentage is very low, you have no problem. If that percentage is very high, you can't make it.
Right. That makes sense. So, but would not the other, would not the other countries that have received, it was in a very similar situation to Greece, wouldn't they request the same?
That's a very good question, and the answer is the following. That's what Eurozone is afraid of. But
Right.
that's actually a wrong dilemma, and I'll explain to you why. Do you know any other countries in the Eurozone being in a 6-year long recession, having a reduction of GDP by 27, 28%, having a 27.5% unemployment, and most of all, having a debt to GDP ratio of 180%? And I'll accompany this thesis with the following. Let's say that I owe you $1,000, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you know that I currently don't have more than, let's say, $200. And it's not likely that I'm going to get, let's say, more than a few $100s more. Will you actually push me to the brink of bankruptcy, that I have nothing to lose, and tell you, listen, you remember your $1,000 that I owed you? Yes. You're getting zero out of it because, I can't make it. Or will you try to compromise so you can get the maximum percentage out of the dollar, both for you and your taxpayers, obviously? So at some point, don't you have to look at the situation objectively and say, okay, I have to broker the best kind of deal so I can get the maximum percentage of what I can claim from a situation that has already gone bad, and I'm partly responsible as well, because if you lend me $1,000 knowing that there is a good chance I won't be able to repay it, and you're partly responsible, I'm not going to say that you're 50% responsible. Let's say you're 10% responsible, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, okay, so, well, what, I mean, if under those, well, maybe the solution is for the IMF and the rest of the creditors are, if you're, if a benchmark is hit, an unfortunate benchmark would be, GDP at 180%, or debt to GDP ratio at 180%, a certain amount of unemployment. If you fall into the category of Greece, then we will make very similar type of concessions if it comes down to that.
Varoufakis, between the huge number of BS recommendations he had made it, because as a theoretical economist he's just fine, but as it seems as a as a minister of finance, he's almost a joke. Yeah.
Sorry.
Had made a suggestion that I really liked, actually. He has suggested swapping part of the Greek debt with perpetuities. For whoever doesn't know what perpetuities are bonds that never mature. They pay you a coupon, let's say, on a yearly basis, but they never mature. So you get paid, to the end of the time. Obviously, there is a mathematical way to calculate the current value of a perpetuity. So it's not like a Ponzi scheme or something like that, for whoever doesn't know bonds. So he had suggested swapping some of the Greek debt with perpetuities that will pay a coupon depending on the growth of Greek GDP, which is a smart idea, actually, because if you help Greece do better, you will be paid more, a bigger percentage of your debt, of the debt owed every year, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was actually a decent recommendation. Obviously,
how did that fly?
They shot it down immediately.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay. Well, Steve, so here we are. Let's talk about a timeline. And by the way, we only have about 7 minutes until GDP is released. I'm gonna have to just cover that really quick. And
Sure.
and by the way, I appreciate you being here. We got some comments that have come in from other listeners. If you don't mind hanging around for the next 30 minutes.
No, it's gonna be my pleasure.
Okay, but let's talk about like the timeline that we're dealing with. So anything that gets passed, or anything that gets agreed to, obviously is going to have to be passed in Parliament. And tell us about how the legal process works there in Athens.
There's going to be since the time is very tight, there's going to be a special process to bring it in Parliament as for vote under specific circumstances. Let's say under a RAS agreement. And I think that it will be voted from the Parliament. I can't be sure it will be voted from the Syriza party members, I mean from their majority, but there are other parties, like the previous government party, and a couple of other parties that are willing to vote for it because they know that the alternative, I talked about it the previous time, but let me briefly say again, if Greece at the moment goes back to its own currency, the situation is something you cannot easily predict, but it's going to be so dire that it's going to bring memories of post-World War II era. We don't even have a second currency prepared, and at best case scenario, you need months to implement that. So capital controls, if there is no agreement in place, will definitely start on Friday noon after the banks close. I have no doubt about that.
Right.
And after that, you will have an economy completely freezing because the only thing that the government will be able to do is issue IOUs. Those IOUs will take temporarily the place of a secondary currency, which obviously is going to immediately be losing value on a daily basis because who's going to be accepting IOUs?
Right, I don't want a drachma. I want pay me in euros. I don't,
Exactly. So IOUs nominally will be worth, let's say, the same amount, but who is going to be willing to exchange them for real euros that they've kept on the side? Probably nobody, or actually, there's going to be a black market about it from people that have already made arrangements for that, and they're going to be buying it like let's say, at a rate that will be definitely lower than the drachma rate at some point. Is going to be like 15% on the cent. You know what I mean? 50 cents on the euro. So at some point they can profit from it. At some point, in the future. So the economy is going to completely freeze. And if that happens, you're going to see something like -10 GDP just this year. And you know how it is after that. Inflation rate of 15, 20, 25%, because suddenly you will start to have to pay everything with a depreciated currency, etc., etc., etc. So people that think that they have nothing to lose from going back to the drachma, and they're dreaming that they're going back to the drachma they had at 95, 98, 99, 2000, just before the switch to the euro, obviously have no clue.
Right, these are, I mean, these are ideas that the average Greek citizen says, well, if we have to go back to the drachma, it's really not going to be that big of a deal, and they've been
Yeah.
maybe told by the government that
Yeah, part
don't
of the
worry.
Syriza government that are communists are feeding them that idea. So what do you think? I mean, we even had a guy, I mean, he is a minister of the current government. He's a guy, he's an economist that has spent almost his whole life working in London. And he's been telling to people that the depreciation of the drachma, if we go back to drachma, is going to be around 15 to 20%. Let me make that more specific. That means that he believes that the Greek drachma is going to be a stronger currency than the Canadian dollar. Just by listening to that, you have two choices, either crying or laughing. If you're not Greek, probably you're laughing about it, which makes sense. But, if you're Greek and are listening to that and you know what's happening, you're probably, in tears. And those people are responsible, for guiding, the country and the state and the citizens to the right path. What else
My
is there to
goodness.
say?
Well, Steve, we have a few questions that have come in, and I'd like to address them here in just a couple of minutes. We have to just cover U.S. GDP that's coming in. And it's the news is always in the rears, but it's worth noting that final GDP, the market's looking for negative 0.2%, and slight contraction for the first quarter, but I believe it's first quarter GDP should be released. Anyway, there's let me see if I can grab a comment really quick that had come in. And for those of you that are listening in, by the way, I should also let you know that this is Steve. This is Steve and who he is and who you've been listening to. And Steve, this is not your Alfa Romeo, since I've actually been in your Alfa Romeo.
I haven't
which
had
is
an
really,
Alfa Romeo, yes.
You have a different Alfa Romeo, which, by the way, is a very, very fun car. Being a father and relinquished all my nice cars once my kids were born, I really do did enjoy. But this is
how it is. After the kids grow up, you're going to go through your second puberty.
That's correct. I'm excited about that. I'm really looking forward.
And you're still going to be quite young, so no problem with
that. So this is Steve. If for those of you that don't know who he is, and if you don't follow him on Twitter, he is VULGI. It's at VULGI. And Steve, your last name is Vulgaris. Vulgaris. Okay, and it's but
so it's like a nickname. I had it since school. It's Stelios Vulgaridis, actually my name. But
cool.
Foreigners can't say Stelios very easily, so Steve is fine, etc.
Yeah, right, exactly. Stelios is for a lot of foreigners that are unfamiliar with Greek names. It's more difficult. So Steve works.
Yeah. And,
all right.
And so to be honest, Stelios is actually Stylianos. Stelios comes from there, so it's even harder.
All right. Well, we have GDP coming out in just moments. I got the U.S. dollar, Japanese yen. We'll know if it's a good number or a bad number based on the dollar yen and how it reacts. We usually pay attention to the dollar yen initially. I don't think a weak number would surprise anybody, even if it came in slightly weaker at negative 0.3 or 0.4%. But remember, this is GDP, and this is a read after the fact. The number should be out, and it comes in line at negative 0.2% as expected. So
no fireworks there.
I'm sorry?
No fireworks there.
No fireworks there. No, it's very, very in line, and we probably won't see a lot of movement.
And to be honest, even if it was a little bit worse, as you said, Blake, everybody's already betting on the second half recovery story. So I don't think, for example, if it was a negative 0.3, anybody would really You know?
Yeah, they wouldn't flinch. I don't
Yeah,
think so either. Okay, so let's address some of these comments if you don't mind.
definitely.
Patrick writes in. This is the very first comment that came in even before you spoke. He said, "Steve, how far apart or aligned is public sentiment on staying within the euro and Syriza's political hardliner to the left?"
Uh, People, a vast majority of the people still wants to stay in the Eurozone, but it has been decreased by, let's say, 80 to 85% to around 65%,
So
due to the rhetoric of Syriza. So mostly Syriza is to blame for that because, among other things, they've been promising that, listen, and even if things go bad, don't worry about it. Things are going to be fine.
got it. Which we all know is realistically not going to be the case. But
As
they're
I've told to some people that wanted to have this debate without even having the knowledge in Greece, I told them, I honestly hope you never have to realize how right I am in, in explaining you what's going to happen.
yeah, right, exactly. Ron writes in, I saw this chart of total debt repayment, uh, and I don't know where he saw it from, but he says, does Greece have the GDP to revenues to even come close to a meaningful repayment? I don't see how.
No,
What
he's
are,
right. He's right. He's
yeah,
right. This debt, this NPV, this net present value of the debt, is not serviceable. End of story. That's it. And you know something? We're trying to rectify a situation by doing things that partly work. For example, it's already been proven that 50% of the taxes you keep applying come back as a reduction of the GDP. So, for example, the government suggestion at the moment was 8 billion euros of further taxes, and we know as a fact that that would mean roughly a 5 billion decrease of Greek GDP. So the final reduction of debt to GDP would be half.
wow, that's something that
Troika
that
has already admitted that they were completely wrong in the multipliers anyhow. They were
yeah,
completely wrong in the multipliers, for whoever know what multipliers are in macroeconomics. Let's say to the effect that the austerity would bring to the GDP, because they hadn't taken into account that the Greek economy is a lot more closed as an economic system than the average European society. So,
sure,
for example, whatever people got as pensions, as salaries, etc., a huge part of it ended up in the economy boosting consumption. So they hadn't, and they have actually acknowledged their mistake since 3 years ago, that they miscalculated the multipliers. So they've already agreed that it was partly their fault that the medicine was, wrong. Obviously, as I told you, the fault is at the Greek people, I mean, to begin with. But things that happened after that, let's take this situation as granted, because after some point it was, the situation was not handled properly. that's a fact. I think that nobody disagrees with that.
yeah, they
At
can't
least
dispute that,
behind closed doors, at least. Yes.
right? Okay, Rich asks, hey, Blake and Steve, I have two questions. Have you seen much brain drain, for example, talent leaving Greece, which is a good question. I mean, you're still there, so I mean there's something there's some hope for Greece, Steve. I'll say that. Secondly, what is the impact of moving the pension age to 67, and why is it seen as such an issue? Cheers. Now, those are great questions asked by Rich. So first off, brain drain. Do you see a lot of talent, intelligent people, which, as you've mentioned to me privately and publicly, that there's a lot of very talented and very well educated people in Greece. Are they leaving?
Yes, in masses. Already 100,000 people, we're talking for people with an average education of a master's degree, have already left the country. And it's ongoing. And I will remind you that we're talking about a country that has around 11 million people. So
Right.
100,000 have already left, and more are leaving by the day.
Okay.
And I remind you, if we even want to look at it only in economic terms, this is a lot of human capital. One of the forms of capital an economy has is the human capital. Okay,
Sure.
human capital is the accumulation of talent, education, uh, work experience, etc., etc., etc. And
Right.
this human capital has been paid a lot by the taxpayer. On average, 180,000 euros per university student, and 100,000 of them have already left.
Wow. That's amazing. And so, I mean, because obviously people are leaving there because they're saying, well, there's nothing for me here in Greece, maybe family, but professionally, there's nothing for me, and it's hard for me to make a living for my family or support my family. So I'm going to seek work elsewhere,
Exactly.
whether it's London or Brussels or wherever. Um, that's a great question, Rich, and I hadn't even really put a whole lot of thought into that. So, how about the pension age? So, you and I have talked privately about pension ages, and you've even given me some examples and of friends that you and your friends have that are young, that are on pension, that are basically retired at the ages of 40, 45. They explain to
Yeah.
me how that's working.
Yes. Like until a few years ago, there were some situations under people could uh, take a pension at the age of 40 something. Of course, that was not the majority of people, not by a long shot. And as always, we're talking mostly about people that were working for the state, public employees, because there is one more of the examples how there's going to be how there has been a discrimination between the public and the private sector on the opposite side of where it should have been. The average pension age somebody will be eligible for his pension in the private sector is 5 years higher than if he's working for the public sector. So yeah, there are examples of people that have been collecting pension since 40, 45 years old. And as you understand,
Wow.
somebody that has paid for 20 years maximum, the pension system, and is then collecting for 40 years is,
It just doesn't work.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
mathematics that doesn't work. Add to that, the obvious problem that almost every European society has, demographic problem, aging population, and you know very well that this is a system that was doomed to fail since many years ago. I know that as a Greek person, I will tell you a story. I've already told you the story, but I can share it with our friends if you want. The
Yes,
story was,
please.
you know what story I'm talking about, with Sprouse report,
Oh,
the one I
yes,
was
yes,
sharing with you, Nick.
yes.
Yeah, there was Konstantinos Simitis, a previous prime minister, had brought. He was a technocrat, actually. He was a university teacher in Germany in economics, if I remember right, or in an equivalent topic. If not economics, it was finance or something like that. Doesn't matter. He was into economics. So when he became a prime minister and took over PASOK, which was the populist party, the most popular and the populist
PASOK, just
PASOK, yes.
PASOK, just so everybody understands. PSOK, POSOK,
P
PASOK.
A P A S O K, yes.
Got it. Okay.
He immediately called some people he had worked with in the past. One of them was a university professor, either in Oxford or in Cambridge, I can't remember. I think it was back at 1997. This guy was called Sprouse, and he asked him to make a report on the viability of the Greek pension system. That was almost 20 years ago. So Sprouse and his team, after plenty of months, they produced a report more or less saying that the viability of the pension system is looking extremely bad. He actually more or less said that without a huge, huge reform to the whole pension system, it shouldn't be viable for more than 5 to 20 years, depending on the situation, on the general economic situation. Needless to say that he was accused from being a traitor to being a capitalist to being I don't know what. He was accused from anything you can think of. And there were people actually demonstrating, going in rallies, asking for the government not to take into account in the pension enforcement system the Sprouse report. And the government budged and implemented only a very, very, very small amount of the changes he suggested. Because every single government that has governed this country from 1974 up to today was mostly a populist government. And due to competition, I mean political competition, even the party, New Democracy, that was, neoliberal and pro-capitalist in the good sense, etc., had actually to go into promising exactly the same things because people always wanted to believe the person that would offer them more. So you would never get, the majority of the votes from PASOK, let's say, if you didn't promise more or less the same things. So this kept on going and going and going because instead of the parties meeting with each other and seeing what's good for the country 20 years ahead and saying, listen, we're obviously in a tough situation, we have to handle it, which means that we cannot start promising more than what we can offer, because at the end of the day, the country is going to be in ruins and none of us is going to benefit from that. But you know how it is. Political interests always put first what is going to make you popular for the next 4 years. And this is how we got from point A to point Z, with point Z being bankruptcy.
Yeah, and that's typical of every government. I mean, Greece isn't alone in this.
Yeah, but probably not in this extent.
Sure, of course. It's unreal, Steve. I mean, and so here's a comment from Daniel. This is obviously Daniel being a European. And he says, perhaps Steve and everyone else needs to admit that there is no solution for the Greece issue. It will never be able to pay back due to its lack of economy that's allowed to invent, manufacture, and export any product that would be sellable elsewhere. Greece is unable or unprepared to change its way of doing business and instead keeps blaming the EU for its predicament. If Greece gets out of the euro, the new currency will drop by 50% or more, and Greece will drop into the level of a developing country. Sorry, I don't mean to be mean, but I think
everything you've read up to now is more or less objective, and I'm in line with it. So he's not mean; he's just being a realist. But he's forgetting something. It's what I said. Greece leaving the Eurozone at the moment is not going to help anybody. It's not going to help the creditors get part of their money back. It's not going to help the Greek people. And most of all, it's not going to help the European Union idea. The European Union idea was about solidarity at some point. It was about making a federal state. And part of the blame that Greece and any Greece that managed to mishandle their little shops, let's call them, is the fact that the European Union partners were never bold enough to go through with the whole process. I remind you that the European Union, for whoever knows a little bit of European Union history, the European Union construction started by the Rome Agreement back in 1957, and the final aim was for the European Union to become a federal state, which means common planning, common budget, common political decisions, etc., etc., etc. The reason we've been pushed so many years back is because when it was time, when it was agreed every time that they will give more power to the centralized European Union institutions, they always backed up or put obstacles in the middle, because none of them wanted to shed, I mean, from the local politicians, wanted to shed their power, to
Right.
a broader organization.
It sounds great in theory, but no one really wants to relinquish what they what they have and their independence, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, uh, and but with that being said, the Greece's admission into the European Union probably, I mean, it's easy to look at hindsight, should have never happened. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
I mean,
Definitely.
because and I would probably say not only Greece, but it probably would be the same. You could say the same thing for maybe Portugal and Spain. Uh,
Almost all the southern European countries, some of them a little bit less, some of them a little bit more, toyed with the numbers to make them look like they are in the spectrum of the acceptable limits that the Eurozone had set. If I remember right, those were inflation, spread from the top three countries in the Eurozone, a specific spread that you shouldn't be above, deficit, and those three actually, I think they were. And yes, most countries in the south cooked the numbers, some of them less and some of them more. Greece was obviously the extreme example on that as well.
yeah, and so this is back in 2002, correct? 2001.
2001, yes.
Yeah.
But the cooking started a couple of years before, because
Got it.
you know that you are during the admission period, so you have to start cooking the numbers a couple of years, before that.
Right, right. All right. So Rick writes in, he goes, man, Steve is so clear explaining the whole thing. No magic here. He just gives the perfect solution. Can't push Greece down the cliff, recognizing taking part of the debt in GDP percent that allows the future payment.
Yeah,
Best interview.
there's not going to be any winners if they push Greece to the brink. Honestly,
Yeah,
no winners from the
yeah,
situation.
right. Exactly. He said best interview and info available. Congrats, Blake, and thanks,
Thank you
Rick. It's not
for
me,
your
it's
good work.
Steve. Alex says, so I believe this issue raised by the European institutions, the IMF, are a pressure to bring down an inconvenient government. After today, I have no doubts about it. Here in Portugal, the government is passive and follows the suggestions blindly, and we are hardly better off. That's
Explain to him that this was what the Syriza government thought here, that they will follow a different kind of tactic than the previous government, and they will go into the offensive, and they will be able, in a sense, to blackmail in more concessions, in the sense that it's going to create a turmoil for the whole Eurozone construct, etc. But they should have known since start that you cannot bluff when all your cards are on the table. And their government, that probably their people, their citizens are also accusing of passivity, already know behind closed doors. Do they think, I'm not talking about our friends specifically, that despite what they say on television, behind closed doors, the conversations go like, oh, hello, good morning, tell us what do you need from us, and we're going back to the parliament and signing it tomorrow. No, there are intense conversations, there are fights, etc. And they know the limits of the Troika. And the Troika has very specific limits. And the reason is the following. They know that if they back down to one of them, two things happen at the same time. One of them, they admit of being wrong. Two, everybody is going to ask for the same kind of treatment. Let me explain. Everybody includes Italy, which has more than 2 trillion debt, which means that it's not a number you can toy with.
right.
So if you say, let's say, okay, let's make a 20% haircut, and then Italy comes and tells you, okay, I want a 20% haircut as well. Yes, that's 400 billion. For Greece, the number is, negligible. I mean, in comparison to the 17 trillion of 16, 17 trillion of Eurozone GDP. But the 400 billion, add to that Spain, and other countries that are a lot, bigger. So, they are also locked in a situation that they know they haven't been handling things right.
Yeah.
And they know that Greece at the moment is a terminal patient, but I very well know what their intentions are. Their intentions are the following. Letting time for the others that are not so terminally ill because they caught the situation a little bit earlier than being on the terminal ill phase, letting them recover a little bit more so they need less to push for haircuts, and then solve the debt situation of Greece by haircutting the NPV, which they know they have to do, but they don't want to do it now.
So I got a comment from a German, Windsor. He writes in, Blake, it's difficult to discuss in a foreign language, but there's a German figure of speech that means never throw good money into a bad investment, or sometimes you have to end a nightmare before the nightmare never ends, and which is basically don't throw good money after bad. As a German, perhaps this should be the end, and then that's probably the German stance.
Okay, let me tell to our German friend the following. First of all, I have nothing but respect towards the Germans. It's one of the, of the people, I've traveled to a lot of countries, that I like the most. It's not by accident that they rebuilt a completely devastated country from scratch twice within the same century. Okay. Definitely, the Greek citizen has a lot to envy from the German mentality. And I really hope that one day, Greek citizens will be able to think a lot more like the Germans, and hopefully this whole mess will end up making, general changes to the mentality, and down the line, Greeks will look back into history and recognize the mistakes and fix them. But I have to tell him the following. Germany has benefited from Greece and the rest of the southern countries' inclusion in the Eurozone a lot more than the money they have not spent. They have only up to today given, let's say, collateral, as a backstop to any losses. They still haven't suffered even a single euro of loss. Oppositely, the exports of Germany, of the private sector of Germany and the public sector to Greece, have been hundreds of billions of euros. Germany has been able to export in countries outside the Eurozone with a hugely depreciated currency in comparison to what the German mark would be at the moment. There is no doubt at the moment the German mark would be the strongest single currency of the planet, end of story, if there was a separate German mark.
Can I stop you there? Because Rich, who's in the UK, he said the Germans have been the largest beneficiaries of this project. The irony is they will never let the Greeks leave. Otherwise, the euro is going to rip and probably go to parity with the sterling as a result of the Deutschmark reweighting.
Exactly.
And that's been my argument the whole time.
Exactly. So as an economist, although to be honest, let me state that once more.
Okay.
Typically, I'm not an economist. My studies are on finance and business administration second degree. But I was always a very fond lover of economics. So I've taken a big amount of macroeconomic and microeconomic courses, due to that. And I'm a fond lover of, reading and studying economics. So, theoretically, I'm very close to being an economist. Typically, I'm in finance, okay? Just to make that clear.
Okay.
I can tell you that the benefits of Germany are so much greater than the pain of having to deal with signing in parliament. And yes, are we creating trouble for them as well? Definitely. Is it our right to do that? Definitely not. Have they been helpful so far, and has Merkel been helpful in the extent she could do it without stirring, too much the pot? Yeah, definitely. But as a German citizen, and having heard me already so far for 55 minutes, he must already recognize how objectively I'm approaching the issue. I can guarantee him there is not even a single euro of loss for his country. Actually, the exact opposite.
Right. And I think a lot of other Europeans view it the same way. I know as an American, I see that. And if I see it, I know Europeans definitely see it. So, but and so it's gosh, it's such an interesting predicament. Anyway, Steve, we're at the end of our time, and I just want to thank you so much for being here. I wasn't able to get every question. I got most of them. I want to thank you for being here and spending the time with us today, giving us your viewpoint on what's happening there in Athens. And from what I understand, you were at the political rally. You were at the rally yesterday, correct?
Yeah. It was actually a funny rally. I mean, it was kind of weird being there, because the funny part was that the people that were demonstrating for the pro-Eurozone demonstrators were actually the people that, if things go to hell, most of them have a plan B. You know what I mean? But they realize that the rest of the people have no plan B. And the rest of the people that have no plan B, a big part of them doesn't realize the alternative solution, what the alternative solution is, which is actually, as close as possible to a post-war situation.
Well, I hope it doesn't come down to that, Steve. I really, as you know, I have a
the
big
chances
fondness.
the chances are, Blake, that they are going to find the solution, since they came so close. But if the solution, and I will make, I will make, I will make an attempt to look into the future. Let's say 6 months into the future at the moment. If the mixture of political and economical solutions that involve this new memorandum are the kind that I have already seen and leaked, 6 months down into the future, we will be looking into finding the next set of measures that the Greek economy is going to need to go through another 6 months.
So, from what you're saying is, it looks like we're going to get the can kicked. Yes. 6 months from now, we're going to have to get ready to kick it again.
Yeah, but every time it's going to be worse and worse, because the real economy, the private sector economy, is going to be even worse. And even less people are going to be willing to invest their money here, and a lot of people will just have said, let's be done with it. I don't care anymore. I'm not even looking into the possibility. Let them do whatever they want to do. And at the end of the situation, we're going to have a bitter ending, that both sides will have the reasons to be bitter, and both sides are going to be at fault. That's not the way to handle a situation.
It isn't, and I hope it doesn't come down to that, Steve.
Let's hope it doesn't.
And I know that's everybody involved, and especially you as a Greek citizen, and you as a citizen of the world too.
Yeah.
So, Steve, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.
And I know everybody.
I really hope I could answer everybody's question, and another time perhaps. Hopefully under better circumstances.
Yes, let's hope so. Let's hope we can make it through the next week. On a positive note.
Definitely. Yeah, the next couple of days are going to be extremely crucial. I think whatever happens within the next couple of days is going to be it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. Once again.
Have a nice day, everybody. Thank you for having me, Blake.
Thank you, Steve. Bye. Take care.
Hey, Steve.
Oh,
I want to say thank you too.
Good morning,
Steve. It's Kip.
Good morning, Kip. Yeah, I know your voice. I hope you're having a nice day.
Thank you. Yes, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right, Steve. Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye. All right. Good morning, Steve. And by the way, or good morning, Kip, rather. And hi, everybody. And that was Steve Vulgi. If you guys don't follow him on Twitter, this is here. I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the chat box. He's a real. Obviously, he's a very sharp guy, very very intelligent, good technician, great technician. Understands the macro environment like better than most, and he's a pleasure to have on here and explain the situation and what's happening in Greece. And Kip, what any thoughts about what he had to say?
You know, it's just, I want to say it's kind of scary. You know, there's a lot of people's lives at stake that, you know, could be financially devastating for them. And, you know, this is, it's something the whole world's watching because, you know, this is one of the first big ones we've seen in a while, and we could see this happen in other countries. So, you know, I think that's why the world's focused on it.
Right. Absolutely. It is scary. I hope obviously the situation's coming to a head as well. So this is a big week, as Steve has pointed out, and I know we've been talking about it. And we're all on pins and needles here in the markets, and obviously the stock market's probably on some pins and needles too. So with that being said, I'm gonna let you take over, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Remember, I'll be back in 3 hours on the Lunch Money webinar, and for those of you not in the chat room, I'll see you then. And thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you everybody for being here.
Yep. Thank you, Blake. Have a good morning.
And by the way, I think Ziggy did record the interview with Steve.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.